My eyes are a little tired today because I did stay up and was so excited. And it's always nice to move into a great, important, serious, but joyful topic, such as reviving education reform, particularly the morning after something like that. So I'm Jeanne Allen. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, I am the founder and CEO of the Center for Education Reform. We are delighted to be your hosts, and also want to extend a warm welcome and thanks to my colleague Robert Enlow of EdChoice, formerly known as formerly known as the Friedman Foundation, for his support as well of this event and his participation. This event is intentionally small, it's intentionally intimate, and you were intentionally selected to be part of the conversation, even if it seemed like we were badgering you to attend, because all of you are people who are benefiting from, interested in, or committed to an agenda that is focused on expanding opportunity innovation in American education, not just so kids can learn, but so that all people can fulfill the American dream. That is the mission of the Center for Education Reform. Some 23 years later, our focus is on not constraining, but expanding the supply and helping and working with policymakers and parents and the media to accentuate that. This June, some of you saw that we issued a report, which is in your packet, a manifesto, A Movement at Risk, and in it we laid out the evidence for this risk that we identified. The risk, in short, which is outlined in your work, so I won't repeat it, is that some 26 years ago, school vouchers, some 25 years ago, charter school laws, were created and really challenged a status quo that for 150 years nobody thought would change. We'd gone through 30 years of reform efforts, 30 years of trying to decentralize, restructure, provide local control, increase funds, lower class size, raise teacher salaries, supposedly raise standards. And I don't have to tell a lot of you in the room that we ended up into the early 90s not showing very much at all. As we've laid out, as many of you in this room have written, as you'll hear today, there was a huge hue and cry to challenge those assumptions, to bring back some sanity to education, truly to make sure that exceptional schooling, content, and choice were part of the landscape. There was a recognition then, as some of you might remember. Hi, Jay, welcome. No, not at all. No, perfect cue. I don't have to go first now. There was a recognition at the time that no one-size-fits-all child. So that's the birth of educational choice. It's interesting, I was recently reading a book many of you have seen by a founding board member of the Center for Education Reform, Checker Finn, and his colleague, Bruno Mano, who also sat on the board of the Center for Education Reform. And I will say to this intimate, close room, that I was struck by reading the book in the wee hours of the night, how the history of charter schooling actually starts somewhere around 2003 in this book. And I went on a tirade for about 15 pages that was going to be a blog. And what it did for me, even though that's yet to be published, what it did for me is it made me actually look back at the history in a much more detailed way than I have in a really long time. And I went back to reports that the Heritage Foundation published in 1990s. I went back to articles written by the late and wonderful John Chubb in 1991. I went back to reports the Center published. And the history of charter schools that was told in Checker's book is nowhere near the history that really actually occurred. In fact, the history of school choice writ large is not what we hear and see. Today, if you engage in a conversation, whether it's with lawmakers, some of whom we have here today, or policy advocates that we welcome to the scene recently, or a TFA person, and you ask them why and how we are delivering choice for kids through a variety of mechanisms, they'll say because there's an intentionality about making sure not just that there are better options for kids, but that there are certain options for kids. They talk about a constrained supply. They talk about wanting to replicate existing schools. And they talk about how there were people sitting in rooms like this one creating the pathway for these reforms to happen. We weren't sitting in rooms creating the pathway. Parents were sitting in hallways talking to legislators who were bold enough and crazy enough, at that time, some of them to be handwriting legislation, policy advocates who might have been working for a governor who were crazy enough to show up at a conference about school choice and take it home, parents crazy enough to say, we actually really believe in core knowledge, and we'd like to bring in our schools. And that's really the genesis. It was messy, incredibly organic and opportunistic, not at all coordinated. And yet today we have a very strategically coordinated, multiple groups of people working often at odds to create a limited amount of schools and options that look the same, that are highly regulated by the exact same people that the choice movement sought to replace. So it's at that backdrop that we're here today. And we call it EdReform Revived because we think EdReform has actually been dying on the vine for quite a long time, not something many of us recognize, as depressing as that may sound, but if you go to the hinterlands, if you talk to the teachers and the parents, if you talk to some of the policymakers, they're fighting an uphill battle. They're looking for anything to defend the idea that they might stand up and say, we want to bring about more choices for kids. Before that sentence even gets out of their mouth, they have to have an army of facts behind them. Otherwise, they're not bold to say it. So the last time I looked, this was a great country full of capitalist and market-based principles. And while it's important to always be concerned about success, effectiveness, efficiency, and quality, we wonder whether or not we have the right data points, the right research, and the right conversations going on. So when we convened the manifesto group in June, we said we would do a couple of things as a Center for Education Reform, and we hope we would find people to work with us and coalesce with us. It was the product of 6 months, actually, of soul searching and talking to people around the country. And at the time, moving into the development of the manifesto, in fact, sort of the re-envisioning and the relaunch of the Center for Education Reform, we were hearing the following 3 things. We're not fighting hard enough. The voice is not strong enough, we're on the defensive, and we're getting our butts kicked. So if that's what the majority of people around the country who are working in this day in, day out, getting their hands dirty are saying, we thought we had to pay attention. So we decided we'd start convening people on these discussions. We decided we would find people who we could synergistically work with, even if there was some disagreement, to find a new way forward. We decided what we needed to do is actually be bold enough, not outside in the media to beat our chest and say something isn't working, but internally in a conversation to talk about what policies, programs, and concepts we should be bringing to the American people that they can most embrace, that they can support, and that actually help do exactly what we said we were going to do some 25, 26 years ago, which is help kids get the education they both need and deserve, help improve communities, and actually help all adults with a learning gap that still exists. You know, I like to say that those people who actually, and some of us feel this way, particularly when we're on the run and we have to settle for incremental approaches, that it's not okay to stand up and say, as someone I respect greatly did yesterday at a forum we had for women, that it's okay the Chicago Teachers Union carved in a cap on charter schools into their new contract. That's okay, we still have 15% of our kids in charter schools in Chicago. I reject that. I want us all to reject that. I reject the notion that we can stand up, as hard work as it is, and I get it, we've been slogging for years, and says, we are so excited we got 10 charter schools permitted in the state of Mississippi. We should be saying, isn't it awful we only have 10 schools, the next day we're getting to work. When school superintendents and leaders who want to do innovation and ed technology can't do it because we have arcane ideas about seat time still in play, we have a problem. And so against this incredibly realistic, I would argue, not so depressing backdrop is this amazing optimistic view I want to leave you with before I turn this over to Jay. And that is that the vast majority of people that we see, we talk to, I know many of you talk to, on a daily basis are so excited for change. They are rolling up their sleeves daily. They are tackling this, and they want leadership, and they want guidance, and they are not obsessed with this constant discussion of, does this work right now, and if we can't prove it, we can't make it happen. In fact, I'd say that there is a revolution going on out there, which some of us have seen, regardless of what side you're on, in the American public, and it's a revolution that we used to embrace. In fact, it's a revolution we once started, and if we ignore it, as many of us have, we're going to give way to exactly the kind of status quo that many of those of us in this room believed and still believe is a tragedy for kids. So with that, I'm going to ask Jay Green to help me continue setting the table on what it means to actually enter into this room and into discussion for the rest of the day. Jay, come join me.
Thank